There are moments when everything you believed about your life shatters in an instant, not gradually, not over time, but in one devastating moment of clarity. That moment came on a crisp autumn Sunday when a dented Toyota Camry, its paint faded, its engine sputtering, its passenger door held shut with rope, pulled through the iron gates of a sprawling Mediterranean estate worth $8 million. Before we dive into this story, I want you to do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button, like this video, and mark your presence in the comments below by telling me what time it is, where you are, and what country you're watching from. This will help me know my beautiful family from all around the world. Now let me tell you a story that will shake you to your core. The Toyota Camry's engine wheezed and sputtered as Harrison Blake guided it through the iron gates of his family's estate. The sound, an obscene intrusion against the Sunday afternoon quiet of manicured lawns and imported Italian fountains. The rope holding the passenger door shut had loosened during the drive, and he could hear it scraping against the car's faded paint with each turn. Through the windshield, the Mediterranean mansion rose before him like a monument to everything he was pretending not to be. Cream-colored stucco, terracotta tiles, marble columns framing an entrance that could swallow his pathetic vehicle whole. Beyond the circular driveway, he could see the infinity pool shimmering in the autumn sun, and through the French doors, figures in white moved like ghosts at a funeral he hadn't been invited to attend. Harrison killed the engine and sat for a moment, hands trembling on the steering wheel. 15 years. 15 years since he'd left for Seattle with nothing but a computer science degree and an idea that most people thought was crazy. Cloud Matrix Technologies now employed 12,000 people across 14 countries. His net worth exceeded $3.2 billion. Last month, Forbes had called him the new tech titan. 3 weeks ago, he'd been featured in Time magazine standing in front of his headquarters, wearing a suit that cost more than this car was worth. But none of it mattered. None of the money, none of the success, none of the magazine covers or keynote speeches or private jets had filled the hollow place inside him. He was profoundly, devastatingly lonely. And he had come to believe that his family, these people gathering in white inside that marble palace, only maintained contact because of what he could give them. They loved his money. They loved his connections. They loved telling their friends about their billionaire brother. But did they love him? Today, he would finally know the truth. The plan was simple. Tell them a lawsuit had destroyed his company, that he was bankrupt, homeless, broken, asked to stay with someone while he rebuilt his life. Then watch. Watch who opened their doors and who found excuses. Watch who offered genuine compassion and who saw only inconvenience. Watch who actually loved him when he had nothing left to give. The front door opened before Harrison could knock, and there stood his mother. Margaret Blake, at 72, was elegant in white silk, pearls at her throat, silver hair styled perfectly despite the casual nature of a family gathering. For just a fraction of a second, maybe less, something flickered across her face. Recognition? Knowledge? Something that suggested she saw past the stained t-shirt and worn jeans and 3 days of stubble to the man beneath. But the expression vanished so quickly, Harrison almost missed it. She pulled him into an embrace that lasted exactly 4 seconds longer than normal. Her hands pressed against his back with a firmness that felt almost like a message he couldn't quite read. "Come in, sweetheart," Margaret said, her voice warm honey over steel. "Everyone's here." Harrison crossed the threshold into wealth. The house smelled of catered hors d'oeuvres and expensive champagne, of flowers arranged by professionals and candles that cost $50 each. Crystal chandeliers caught the afternoon light and scattered it across Italian marble floors. On the walls hung art that would pay off most people's mortgages. Originals, not prints, collected over decades of comfortable prosperity. This was old wealth, established wealth, wealth that never had to announce itself because it simply was. And Harrison Blake, worth more than everyone in this house combined, was about to contaminate it with failure. The grand living room stretched before Harrison like a stage set for a play he'd forgotten he was supposed to be in. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the manicured gardens beyond. where a gardening service kept every hedge trimmed to mathematical precision and every flower bed arranged in colors that complemented the house. Inside, his family moved in clusters of white, formal attire that suggested this gathering was more than just Sunday dinner. An anniversary, perhaps? Someone's birthday? Harrison realized with a sharp pang of guilt that he didn't even know. He'd been so consumed with his plan, so focused on his test, that he hadn't bothered to ask his mother why everyone was here. His oldest sister, Carolyn, saw him first. She stood near the marble fireplace in a white Chanel dress that probably cost more than most people earned in a month. Designer heels adding 3 inches to her already impressive height, a diamond tennis bracelet catching the light as she raised her champagne glass. At 42, Caroline Whitmore was the hospital chief operating officer at Mercy General, married to a cardiovascular surgeon, mother to 2 children in private schools whose tuition could fund a small car. She was mid-laugh at something Uncle Charles had said when her eyes landed on Harrison, and her smile froze on her face like ice crystallizing on a window. Natalie noticed her sister's reaction and turned. At 39, she'd made her fortune in luxury real estate, specializing in estates over $5 million. Properties for people who considered money a tool rather than a constraint. Her white silk pantsuit was impeccable. Emerald earrings worth more than the car Harrison had driven here dangled from her ears, and her makeup was flawless in that way that required either professional application or years of practice. She was married to a hedge fund manager, lived in a penthouse overlooking the harbor, and spent last month in Monaco, according to her Instagram account that Harrison occasionally checked from 3,000 miles away. Her eyes widened when she saw him, then narrowed, and he watched her gaze travel from his stained shirt to his worn jeans to his unshaven face with an assessment that was clinical in its precision. But it was Derek who moved. His younger brother set down his champagne flute on a side table and walked forward, hand extended, a genuine smile breaking across his face. At 35, Derek was the family enigma, a financial consultant who ran his own small investment firm, who worked with middle-income clients rather than chasing the ultra-wealthy, who drove a modest SUV and wore white linen that was noticeably less designer than his sister's attire. He was the normal one, people said, the grounded one, the one who hadn't let money become his god. "Harrison," Derek said warmly, gripping his hand, "man, we didn't know you were coming. This is great." Behind Derek, the room was gradually going silent. Uncle Charles, Margaret's brother, who'd made his fortune in real estate development, stopped mid-sentence. Aunt Patricia, who sat on the boards of 3 different charities and treated philanthropy like a competitive sport, set down her hors d'oeuvre. Cousins and their spouses turned, conversations dying on their lips as they registered the disheveled man standing in the doorway like a beggar at a palace gate. Harrison stood at the threshold between 2 worlds, the world of wealth and comfort and carefully maintained appearances that his family inhabited, and the world of failure and desperation that he was pretending to have fallen into. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. Them in their white formal attire, him in clothes that looked like they'd been fished out of a donation bin, them with their champagne and catered food, him with empty pockets and trembling hands. The silence stretched. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked. Through the windows, a bird sang, oblivious to the drama unfolding in this room, full of people who were about to be tested in ways they couldn't possibly imagine. Harrison moved to the center of the room, and the marble floor beneath his worn sneakers felt like ice. He was surrounded by crystal and champagne, and people dressed in white like angels, and he felt like a stain on expensive fabric, something that needed to be removed before it spread and ruined everything it touched. "I need to tell you all something," he said quietly. The words came easier than he'd expected, perhaps because he'd rehearsed them so many times, or perhaps because some part of him had always known this moment was inevitable. He told them about the lawsuit, a competitor claiming patent infringement on Cloud Matrix's core technology. He described legal fees that consumed everything, battles that dragged on for months, settlements that required liquidating assets he'd spent 15 years building, Cloud Matrix Technologies forced into bankruptcy, The Seattle house foreclosed. Investments sold at a loss. Everything gone. He was broke, homeless, starting over at 40 with nothing but the clothes on his back and a car held together by hope and duct tape. I need somewhere to stay for a few months, Harrison said, and he hated how small his voice sounded. Just until I can rebuild. Until I can figure out what's next. The silence that followed was not sympathetic. It was not the silence of people gathering their thoughts to offer comfort. It was the silence of people calculating, assessing, measuring the cost of compassion against the disruption to their carefully ordered lives. Caroline set down her champagne glass with exaggerated care, as though any sudden movement might shatter the moment. Oh, Harrison, that's just terrible. Really terrible. Her voice dripped with concern that never reached her eyes. But our situation is so complicated right now. We're doing a complete renovation. The entire West Wing is gutted. Contractors everywhere. Dust. Noise. It would be impossible. I'm so sorry. Natalie's voice was perfectly polite, her tone modulated with the same skill she used to sell $8 million estates to people who treated houses like trading cards. I'm hosting the Coastal Estate Showcase next month. International buyers, million-dollar listings, staying at the house for viewings and cocktail parties. Having you there during this time would really compromise the image we need to project. You understand, don't you? Compromise the image. Those words hung in the air like poison gas, and Harrison felt something crack inside his chest. Not surprise. He'd expected this, but the confirmation of it still hurt in ways he hadn't anticipated. Uncle Charles cleared his throat. My mother-in-law just moved into the guest house. No room, son. Wish I could help. Aunt Patricia touched her pearls. The timing is just so difficult with the charity gala planning. Perhaps after the season? The excuses multiplied like bacteria in a petri dish. Too small, too busy, too complicated, too inconvenient. Cousins found reasons why their spare bedrooms were suddenly unavailable. Their spouses discovered pressing obligations. Everyone had something that made helping Harrison impossible right now. Maybe later, maybe when things calmed down, maybe after this or that event. But not now. Never now. And through it all, Margaret sat in her high-backed chair near the window, watching. Her expression was unreadable. No sympathy, no disappointment, no emotion Harrison could identify. She said nothing, did nothing. Just watched her children perform this ritual of rejection with the detached interest of a scientist observing an experiment. Harrison looked around the room at the catered food on silver platters, at the champagne and crystal flutes, at the marble and the art, and the casual wealth displayed like it meant nothing. And suddenly it all looked obscene, grotesque. Here they stood in luxury, dressed in white like they were pure and innocent, while their brothers stood before them in stained clothes asking for basic human kindness. Every single person had said no. Every single person had found a reason why helping him was impossible. Every single person except one. Derek waited. He stood quietly while the excuses finished, while the terrible silence settled back over the room like fog over cold water. Then he moved, crossing the marble floor with purpose, and placed his hand on Harrison's shoulder with a firmness that felt like an anchor in a storm. Man, I don't care about any of that, Derek said, and his voice was steady, genuine, without the careful politeness that had characterized everyone else's rejections. Money, status, success, that stuff never mattered to me. You know me. I run a small investment consulting firm. I'm not trying to be a billionaire or make Forbes lists. I just want to help people plan for their futures and be good to the people I love. He looked Harrison directly in the eyes, and in that moment, Harrison saw something he hadn't seen in anyone's face in 15 years. Pure, uncomplicated acceptance. And I love you. You're my brother. You can stay with me as long as you need. We'll figure this out together. Something cracked open in Harrison's chest. Not a small crack, but a fissure that ran deep, splitting through 15 years of accumulated cynicism and suspicion. For 15 years, he'd believed that everyone in his family was motivated by greed and self-interest. that they maintained contact only because of what he could provide. For 15 years, he'd carried this suspicion like armor, protecting himself from disappointment by never expecting anything better. And maybe, just maybe, he'd been wrong. Maybe there was one good person in this family. Maybe there was one person who actually loved him for who he was, not what he had. Derek hugged him, and Harrison nearly broke down right there in that elegant living room, surrounded by people in white who turned away from him. He felt tears burning behind his eyes and swallowed them back, but barely. They left together, past Caroline, who wouldn't meet his eyes, past Natalie, who'd already returned to her champagne, past Uncle Charles and Aunt Patricia, and all the cousins who'd found reasons to look anywhere but at him. Harrison didn't look back at his mother, still sitting in her high-backed chair, still watching with that unreadable expression. He couldn't bear to see whatever was in her face, disappointment, vindication, or worst of all, nothing at all. In Derek's modest SUV, Harrison finally felt like he could breathe. The leather wasn't premium. The dashboard had scratches. There was a coffee stain on the center console. And it was the most beautiful vehicle Harrison had ever been in. Derek's condo was in a middle-class neighborhood where the houses were well-maintained but not ostentatious, where people mowed their own lawns, and their cars were practical rather than statements. The two-bedroom unit was clean, simple, comfortable. Not wealthy, not poor, just normal. The kind of normal Harrison had left behind when he chased his dreams to Seattle and never looked back. The spare bedroom had pale blue walls and basic furniture from somewhere like IKEA or Target. Functional, inoffensive, unpretentious. The window overlooked a small park where children played on swings and parents pushed strollers, living ordinary lives that suddenly seemed extraordinarily precious. On the kitchen table, Derek had left a note in his messy handwriting. Make yourself at home. Food in fridge. Back around 6. Company. Harrison sat on the edge of the bed in that spare room and thought about the last 15 years. All the accumulation, all the penthouses and private jets and exclusive clubs, all the things he'd bought and achievements he'd collected, believing that more was always better, that success meant having what others couldn't afford. And here, in this simple room with budget furniture and no luxury at all, with a window that looked out on a park where ordinary people lived, ordinary lives, Harrison felt more at peace than he had in years. Maybe he'd finally found it. Maybe after all this time, after all his suspicion and testing, he'd discovered the one person who actually cared. He had no idea how wrong he was. Alarm went off at 6 a.m., and for the first time in 15 years, Harrison didn't resent it. He'd spent the last decade and a half waking whenever he pleased, checking markets from bed on his phone, his first appointments rarely before 10. But here in Derek's spare room, the early morning felt like a gift rather than an intrusion. They drank coffee together in the small kitchen, where the mugs didn't match, and the coffee maker was a basic drip model that Derek had probably owned since college. Derek explained his work over toast and jam, financial planning for middle-income families, teachers and nurses and firefighters who trusted him with their modest retirement accounts. It wasn't about maximizing returns or chasing aggressive growth, Derek said. It was about creating security, helping people sleep at night, knowing their futures were protected. Harrison insisted on contributing somehow, and Derek mentioned a side project, helping the Riverside Community Center with fundraising for their after-school programs. So Harrison volunteered. He called potential donors from a list Derek provided, organized donation drives, helped plan a charity auction. His hands, which had spent 15 years doing nothing more strenuous than typing on premium keyboards and signing documents with expensive pens, now stuffed envelopes and arranged folding chairs. His back, accustomed to ergonomic executive chairs and first-class airplane seats, ached from moving boxes of donated goods and setting up tables. Small calluses formed on his palms. He lost weight from the physical activity and eating simpler meals. He slept better, deeper, without the ambient anxiety of billion-dollar decisions hanging over him. His face, freed from the constant tension of managing an empire, looked younger somehow, lines around his eyes softening, jaw unclenching for the first time in years. In the evenings, they sat on Derek's small balcony, barely big enough for two lawn chairs, and talked. Derek shared his life in ways Harrison had never bothered to ask about before. The challenges of running a small business with real ethics in an industry that often rewarded the opposite. His clients who became friends, who invited him to their kids' graduations and sent Christmas cards. His girlfriend Maya, who directed programs at the community center and believed that everyone deserved a chance regardless of their zip code. His dreams of expanding his practice but never compromising his values. Never becoming the kind of advisor who pushed products for commission rather than clients' benefit. And his fears, quiet admissions after his second beer, that he'd never be successful like Harrison, that he'd always be the brother who ran a small firm while his siblings climbed higher and earned more. Harrison listened, really listened. Perhaps for the first time in years, he engaged with someone else's life without calculating what he could gain from it, without measuring the relationship's utility or potential return on investment. There was something pure about this life, something honest about physical work and modest living and conversations that actually mattered. Something genuinely satisfying about looking at a fundraising event he'd helped organize, using donated tables and handmade decorations, and seeing families benefit from programs that would teach their kids music and art and coding. For 3 weeks, Harrison believed he'd found it. Authenticity, truth. A family member who actually cared about him not for his wealth or connections, but simply because they were brothers. He'd sit in the spare room at night, listening to Derek move around the condo and think, maybe I was too cynical. Maybe not everyone is motivated by greed. Maybe Derek really is different. Maybe I've been wrong about people all along. He'd never been more wrong about anything in his life. Tuesday afternoon in the third week, Harrison was in Derek's home office looking for a stapler. The community center needed donation acknowledgement letters assembled, and he'd volunteered to help. Derek was out meeting a client, a school teacher planning for retirement, he'd said that morning over coffee. The office was modest, just like everything else in Derek's life. One desk from an office supply store, a filing cabinet that had seen better days, a bookshelf lined with financial planning textbooks and industry certification manuals. Harrison opened the wrong drawer. Or maybe it was the right drawer, and everything that came before had been wrong. Behind the hanging files, pushed to the very back, where someone would only find it if they were looking or unlucky, was a folder labeled Whispering Pines Development, Confidential. He knew he shouldn't look. He knew this violated Derek's privacy, crossed a line that brothers weren't supposed to cross. His hand hesitated on the folder's edge. He looked anyway. Inside were detailed property records for 47 homes in an established neighborhood. Harrison recognized the street names immediately. This was where their parents lived, where he'd grown up, where oak trees older than he was lined the sidewalks and neighbors knew each other's names. There were assessments showing actual market values next to purchase offers that were 40 to 60% below what the homes were worth. Psychological profiles of homeowners that read like dossiers compiled by someone studying vulnerabilities. Mrs. Chen, 78, widowed, medical debt, son lives out of state. Patterson family, underwater mortgage, husband lost job, desperate. A partnership agreement with Prestige Corp Development outlined the scheme with corporate precision. Derek would acquire properties at below market prices. Prestige Corp would demolish and rebuild luxury condominiums. Derek would receive development fees and profit sharing. The plans showed the entire neighborhood erased, replaced with glass and steel that would sell for triple what the original homes were worth. Harrison's hands began to shake as he found the entry he knew would be there, but prayed wouldn't. Margaret and Robert Blake Estate, assessed value 2.1 million. Offer prepared 1.1 million. Approach, son returning home provides emotional pressure point. Target close date, December 15th. Son returning home provides emotional pressure point. The words punched through him like bullets. Derek hadn't taken him in out of love or compassion or brotherhood. He'd taken him in because a failed, desperate Harrison living with Derek would make their parents feel obligated to help, would create financial pressure, would provide cover for why they might need to sell their home quickly. Access to Harrison's network, even a supposedly bankrupt Harrison, might reveal business secrets, technology strategies, anything useful. And if Harrison truly needed money, Derek could involve him in the schemes, make him complicit. Every conversation on the balcony, every shared beer, every moment of supposed brotherhood where Derek had opened his life and his fears and his dreams. All of it was strategy. All of it was manipulation dressed up as authenticity. Harrison sat on the floor of Derek's office, the folder open in his lap, and felt something inside him shatter. Not the cynical part. That part had expected his wealthy siblings to be selfish, had predicted their rejection. But the hopeful part, the fragile, desperate part that had allowed itself to believe that maybe, just maybe, one person in his family was different, that maybe his test had been too harsh, his suspicions unfounded. Derek was worse than all of them. At least Caroline and Natalie had been honest in their rejection. They'd valued their comfort and appearances over helping him, but they'd done it openly. Derek had offered love while planning to destroy their parents' lives. He'd created intimacy as a tool, weaponized brotherhood, turned trust into a commodity he could exploit. Harrison heard Derek's SUV pull into the parking lot outside. He carefully returned the folder to its hiding place, closed the drawer, found the stapler he'd originally been looking for, and began planning his own revelation. Harrison stood in Derek's office after carefully returning the folder to its hiding place, and made his decision with the cold clarity of someone who just watched their last hope incinerate. He would reveal everything, not just Derek's predatory scheme, but his own deception. He would show them bank statements proving he was worth $3.2 billion, investment portfolios that generated more in a day than most of them earned in a year, property deeds to houses in 3 states and a penthouse in Seattle that overlooked Puget Sound like a throne overlooking a kingdom. He would let them see that he was worth more than all of them combined. Then he would watch their faces as they realized what they'd rejected, what they'd failed, what they'd revealed about themselves. But he wouldn't give them anything. Not money, not help, not forgiveness. He would give them truth. And truth, he believed with the fervor of a convert, would be punishment enough. He called his mother from Derek's balcony while Derek was still out meeting his schoolteacher client, or whatever vulnerable person he was actually plotting to exploit. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the small park below, where children played, oblivious to the darkness being planned above them. "Mom, I need you to arrange something. I need the whole family at the estate on Sunday evening. 7 o'clock. Everyone. Tell them it's important. Tell them I have an announcement." Margaret's voice came through the phone, neutral, unsurprised, as though her son asking to gather the family for a mysterious announcement was the most ordinary request in the world. "Of course, sweetheart. I'll make sure everyone's there." The week that followed stretched like 7 years compressed into 7 days. Harrison continued the charade with the dedication of a method actor who'd forgotten where the performance ended and reality began. He still volunteered at the community center, stuffing envelopes for a fundraiser that would help children whose parents Derek was probably targeting. He still sat on the balcony having conversations about ethics and dreams and fears. He still slept in the spare room with pale blue walls. But everything looked different now, as though someone had replaced a soft focus lens with one that showed every flaw in brutal detail. Derek's smiles looked predatory, his easy charm suddenly seeming calculated and cold. His questions about Harrison's past business dealings felt like interrogations. His kindness tasted poisonous, every gesture of brotherhood now suspect, every moment of supposed vulnerability revealed as manipulation. Harrison prepared methodically. He rented a modest sedan from an airport location where no one would recognize him. Neither impressive nor pathetic, just anonymous. He bought clothes that fit properly from a department store. Nothing designer, but nothing shabby either. He printed bank statements and investment portfolios and property deeds, documentation of wealth so vast it would take minutes just to read through the accounts. He rehearsed his speech 1,000 times, refining each word, imagining their faces when they understood. He felt like a man preparing for an execution, his own perhaps, or theirs, or maybe the execution of whatever relationship had existed between them before he'd decided to test their love and found it wanting. By Sunday evening, Harrison felt empty, hollow. He'd come home 3 weeks ago looking for love, searching for proof that someone in his family cared about him for who he was rather than what he could provide. And he'd found exactly what he'd expected to find: greed, selfishness, betrayal wrapped in the clothes of compassion. His cynicism had been proven correct, his suspicions validated. His test had worked exactly as designed, and somehow that victory felt like the greatest loss of all. Harrison arrived at the estate at 6:55 p.m., early enough to compose himself, but late enough that he wouldn't have to make small talk. The Mediterranean mansion looked exactly as it had 3 weeks ago when he'd first pulled up in that pathetic Toyota with rope holding the door shut. Same cream stucco, same terracotta tiles, same marble columns framing an entrance designed to intimidate. But everything felt different now, as though he were seeing it through glass that had been cleaned of years of accumulated grime. The family assembled in the formal living room, the same space where they'd rejected him with their careful excuses and polite rejections. Carolyn arrived in another designer outfit, this one a pale gray that probably cost what most people paid in rent. Her expression confused and slightly irritated at being summoned. Natalie checked her phone constantly, her body language screaming annoyance at this interruption to whatever important plans she'd had. Derek looked genuinely puzzled, worry creasing his face as he watched Harrison, probably wondering if his scheme had been discovered, if his carefully constructed cover was about to collapse. Uncle Charles and Aunt Patricia filled the expensive furniture, along with various cousins and their spouses, all of them dressed well and looking uncomfortable, uncertain why they'd been called to this strange family meeting. The room hummed with tension, with unspoken questions, with the sense that something significant was about to detonate. Margaret entered last. She moved with unhurried grace to her high-backed chair near the window, the same seat she'd occupied 3 weeks ago when she'd watched her children reject their brother. She sat down, arranged her hands in her lap, and looked directly at Harrison with eyes that seemed to see through walls and time and all the deceptions people built around themselves. The atmosphere crackled. Everyone could see Harrison look different. Clothes that fit properly, face shaved clean, eyes clear and hard as diamonds. He wasn't the desperate failure who'd begged for help. He was something else entirely, and they could feel it even if they didn't understand it yet. Caroline broke the silence, her voice carrying the authority she'd learned from managing hospital departments and difficult surgeons. "Well, you asked us all here. What's this about, Harrison?" Harrison stood in the center of the room, just as he had 3 weeks ago. Then he'd been disguised as a failure, wearing stained clothes and desperation like a costume. Now, he was about to reveal himself as everything they hadn't believed he could be, everything they dismissed with their excuses about renovations and estate showcases and compromised images. He opened his mouth to speak. The bank statements were in his briefcase, the investment portfolios showing accounts in the Caymans and Switzerland and New York, the property deeds proving he owned more real estate than Uncle Charles had developed in his entire career. He'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times, refined each word, imagined their faces when understanding dawned. He was ready to reveal their failure, ready to show them exactly what they'd rejected, ready to expose Derek's scheme and his own deception in one devastating revelation, ready to walk away from all of them forever, leaving them with nothing but the truth and their own shame. But before he could speak, before the first word could leave his mouth, Margaret raised her hand. "Before you say anything," his mother said quietly, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade through silk, "I need to speak first." The room fell absolutely silent. Everyone turned to Margaret. Harrison closed his mouth, the words he'd prepared dissolving on his tongue. Something in his mother's voice, something certain and calm and utterly immovable, made him wait. Margaret looked around the room slowly, deliberately, making eye contact with each family member. Caroline, Natalie, Derek, Uncle Charles, Aunt Patricia, every cousin, every spouse, every person who'd gathered in this room. Then she looked back at Harrison. "I know you're a billionaire," she said clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "I've known for 5 years." The silence was absolute. No one moved. No one breathed. The words hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't yet exploded, but everyone knew was about to. Harrison's prepared speech dissolved on his tongue. The bank statements in his briefcase suddenly felt like props in a play where someone had rewritten the script without telling him. "I know about cloud matrix technologies," Margaret continued, her voice steady as a surgeon's hand. "I've followed your career for 15 years. Forbes, TechCrunch, every interview, every keynote. I watched you build an empire from nothing." She paused. "And I never said a word." The room tilted. Harrison gripped the back of a chair. "I deliberately let this family treat you the way they did," his mother said. "I let you feel rejected. I watched you come home with your lies and your test, and I let it happen." Her eyes held his unflinching. "Do you know why?" Harrison couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. "Because you came home with a lie, Harrison. You created a scenario designed to expose greed, and people responded to the scenario you created. You can't set traps for people and then act surprised when they fall into them. You can't test love and expect it to remain pure. The act of testing corrupts the very thing you're trying to measure." Margaret stood, walked toward him with the same unhurried grace she'd shown 3 weeks ago when she'd first embraced him. That embrace that had lasted 4 seconds too long, that he'd been too blind to understand. "There's something else," she said quietly. "Something I should have told you 15 years ago." She took his hand. Her fingers were warm, steady. "Do you remember your father's life insurance? The $200,000 you thought would keep the house? Help me get by?" Harrison nodded, his throat tight. "I took every penny of it," Margaret said, "and invested it through an anonymous angel investor group in your first startup. Cloud Matrix's seed funding, the funding you always said came from anonymous believers in the vision, that was me, Harrison. I was your first investor." The floor dropped away. Harrison's knees buckled, and he sat heavily in the chair he'd been gripping. "I took out a second mortgage on this house. I worked extra years before retirement. I sacrificed everything so you could have your dream. And I never told you because I wanted you to believe you'd done it yourself." Tears burned behind Harrison's eyes. "Why, you thought you were self-made," Margaret said. And now her voice broke just slightly, the first crack in her composure. "But I had already sacrificed everything for you. I had already made the biggest investment of my life in your success. And you came home to judge a family you thought was greedy, never once considering what had already been given." She released his hand, stepped back. "True character isn't how you treat the poor, Harrison. It's how the wealthy choose to honor truth, whether they use their power to test and trap or to lift and support." Her gaze swept the room, Caroline frozen in her designer dress, Natalie's mascara beginning to run, Derek pale as death. "I let them show you their flaws because I needed you to see yours. You were so obsessed with proving people didn't love you that you almost became the thing you feared most." The room erupted. Caroline trying to explain, Natalie crying, Derek's frantic denials dissolving into admission. Uncle Charles and Aunt Patricia talking over each other. Chaos like glass shattering. Harrison stood slowly. He looked at each of them, his sisters, his brother, the relatives who'd found excuses. Then he looked at his mother, still standing calm at the center of the storm she'd orchestrated. He walked toward the door. "Harrison," Margaret called. He stopped but didn't turn around. "I didn't do this to hurt you," she said. "I did it because I love you, and sometimes love has to be cruel to teach truth." Harrison walked out, past the marble columns, past the fountain, past the iron gates. He didn't write checks. Didn't save anyone. Didn't offer forgiveness or condemnation. He left them with truth. And truth, he was learning, cut deeper than any amount of money ever could. Harrison never returned to his tech empire the same way. He didn't abandon Cloud Matrix, but he fundamentally changed how he used his wealth. He funded startups for people from disadvantaged backgrounds, people who reminded him of who he'd been before his mother's silent sacrifice. He created scholarship programs for first-generation college students. He built affordable housing in the very neighborhood Derek had targeted, blocking the predatory development before it could destroy more families. Derek faced investigation for fraud. His investment firm collapsed. He served probation and community service. Their relationship never recovered. Some betrayals cut too deep for brotherhood to survive. Carolyn and Natalie remained distant. Polite cards at holidays, nothing more. Their rejection hadn't been the worst sin, but their inability to see beyond their own comfort created a gulf that time couldn't bridge. Margaret became the most complicated figure in Harrison's life. She had done something cruel to teach something true. Was that love or manipulation? Harrison never quite decided. They spoke occasionally. Brief calls, careful conversations. She never apologized. He never thanked her. But something existed between them. Understanding, perhaps, or just the weight of truth acknowledged. Years later, Harrison finally understood what his mother had taught him. When you go looking for betrayal, you will find it. You will create scenarios designed to expose the worst in human nature, and human nature will comply. Not because people were always corrupt, but because you gave them the opportunity and invited them to be. But the inverse is also true. When you go looking for trust, you will find that too. You will find it in small gestures, in sacrifices made in silence, in people who love you not despite your flaws, but because they see your potential and invest in it anyway. The real tragedy of Harrison's story wasn't that his family was greedy. It was that a man with everything decided to test people instead of trusting them. That he came home looking for proof of selfishness and almost became the very thing he was seeking. Late at night sometimes, Harrison thinks about that evening at the estate, about his mother's words, about how she forced him to see not the person he wanted to be, but the person he actually was. She gave him a mirror, and sometimes that reflection is harder to face than any amount of rejection or betrayal. Now it's your turn. This story asks us all a difficult question. Are you looking for reasons to trust the people in your life, or reasons to distrust them? Have you ever tested someone's love? What did that test reveal? Truth about them or truth about you? In Harrison's position, what would you have done? Would you have forgiven your family? Cut them off completely? Walked away like he did? I want to hear from you in the comments below. Tell me whether Harrison was right to walk away. Tell me whether Margaret was right to orchestrate this cruel lesson. Tell me what this story made you feel. And while you're here, if this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories exploring the complex nature of family, love, and what it means to be human. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next story.